Hi, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and welcome, Lisa, John, and Gagan Sethi, to this conversation. Very, very excited that you both are here with us. Before we start off, we'll just request you to, in your own words, introduce yourself, maybe a couple of lines, who you are, where you're from, where you're at currently, what you're feeling right now. So, Lisa, please inviting you first.
Great. So I'm Lisa John. I'd define myself as a passionate activist who's always learning something new about change. So it's great to be here in this conversation. I'm also at the moment Secretary General of the Civicus Alliance, which is a network of 10,000 organizations across 175 countries, all of whom, kind of are working for and believe in the right to civic freedoms. It's great to be here also with Gagan, who I know from my very first, professional role in Yuva in Mumbai. But yes, let's hear about Gagan from himself. But it's great to be here with both of you.
Yeah,
Thanks, Lisa.
yeah. Thank you. I'm Gagan Sethi, and I am here in Gujarat in Ahmedabad. I've been a founder of an organization called Jan Vikas, which is basically an incubator organization for many civil society organizations in the country. But I'm one of the cockroaches in this civil society system, and so my job is that we are last to die when everything else goes, and that's what I feel even today. That fighting, though things are getting worse and worse, we still have to maintain hope. So, and my job really is to mentor young people now, look at leadership building and look at strategic ways to fight what is happening on the ground these days, which is terrible.
Thank you, Gagan. I think both of you really encapsulated a little bit about your journeys. And what you said leads, I think, directly into the sort of first conversation that we wanted to have in terms of, where you are located, both personally and professionally, and, very different trajectories which you both have had, yet intersecting, each other for a while. So I think my question to you, Lisa, is, what are the biggest impacts that you see of the pandemic, as well as the growing restrictions in civil society in the current times, and really speaking from your own as well as personal and professional experience, if you would.
Yes, I think there have been several things that we've seen, especially also because Civicus really works on civil society and civic freedoms, right? But none of them are new, I think, and that's I think the important point. Maybe I'd like to stress that a lot of the challenges and the opportunities aren't really new or not, completely directly because of the pandemic, but they're a reinforcement of the trends that we've already been seeing in civil society. So. On a positive note, I think what it has really reinforced is the role and relevance of local organizations, and Gagan will probably speak more to this, but I think it at least for international organizations and especially the aid kind of industry, it really reinforces the need to kind of hold good on the promise of localization, on the promise of really bringing resources back or towards local organizations in the global south. Because obviously the pandemic has meant that nobody's able to fly in and save anyone. You've really had to rely on the network of local organizations, local activists, volunteers, communities, and their structures to really take forward, the agenda of relief and response. And I think what's really interesting is that in many countries, including India, there have been reports that that civil society really, despite all of the restrictions, the kind of resourcing crunch, all the adversity that we're facing, has been the first to respond, and in many instances has responded even more effectively than governments. So at least for us, we feel like this really has to be a time where we're rethinking the operational kind of structure for civil society and really creating or moving towards an ecosystem which is much more enabling of local organizations, especially in terms of resourcing and being able to connect and amplify outcomes. And all of this just sounds like a lot of nice words in a context where most people are either getting arrested or harassed or really facing very, very strong censure from governments for just speaking out or for just criticizing or even asking questions about what the government is doing. The one thing I think that has changed this year, and we've not really seen it in a long time, is that public support for civic freedoms has become much higher. So you're seeing the media and you're seeing public step in now and say that enough is enough, and we really need to be, opening up the space for people and communities and citizens to take action and also question and hold governments and businesses accountable. So it's kind of a tricky situation because on one hand you have like the worst of the repressions and restrictions in a lot of countries, including established democracies. But on the other hand, you have a lot of political support or public support, which is easily kind of converting into political action by people-led movements, right? And I think the question for us really now is how do we invest in growing that support and really shifting then the kind of backward trend on democracy and rights that we were seeing for the last decade or more.
Great. I think that's very helpful, Lisa, in terms of this important point you raise of nothing is really new. These are just emphasis on things that have been existing. And in fact, I think the important point is that despite these restrictions, despite the situation, there's been so much pushback from the local, from citizens. And I think really looking at that as what the pandemic has really thrown up in terms of, really people's power. And there's no way we can continue to ignore that and definitely not try to restrict that. So I think very important. Gagan, you are in India. You've been working so closely with organizations, activists, political groups. What do you see as how the pandemic has, of course, reflected the current situation? But have there been any things that have changed, or has something been brought sharply to focus? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm an atheist, and but the other day I was just going through in the old Christian this thing of the concept of 12 curses, and I said to myself, I think we were paying the price and we are being cursed for something which we have been practicing for such a long time. And what were they? And I think for me, one was this practicing of such deep and unbridgeable inequality. I think what has happened is thrown up that thing like a disease which has come out. Just before I was preparing to come on screen, I got a small film script which Nayan sent me about a few laborers being chained in Goa. They're not allowing them to go back. So I think when we have marauded and raped the environment, when we are practicing such deep discrimination, and so on and so forth, I could go on. I just think this pandemic threw up and put it all out in the open for everybody to see, and therefore shaken, hopefully, a huge amount of conscience of a lot of people. And so I think you're absolutely right when Lisa said this is not new, it's just suddenly surfaced. And it's shaken us a lot. And one of the things that's shaken me as a civil society leader is that a couple of issues we had also forgotten. We had gone into such a linearity of things, pushed by outcomes, objectives, and go on, and stopped looking at people as wholesome, stopped relating to them with love and compassion, not having the time to reflect and relate in a much more compassionate way. I think this threw up, and therefore, and I think a lot of that also the fear that was put in. It took me about a couple of days to fight that fear in the mind before I took the vehicle and started going on the roads. And Lisa, I called you up at that stage also, if I remember, and saying, Lisa, let's do something for people on the road. They're walking. This was the first few days, if you remember. And I said, somewhere we have stopped taking risks. as a large thing. And therefore, really civil society, right to dissent people have become a busload, easily being wiped out. And therefore, there are very deep concerns I have. And I think one of the things which I attribute this to it is some sort of, just bringing in people into civil society who don't have an alternative. They just come here for a job. I know from Lisa's time, a huge amount of young people came in because they wanted to. They wanted to look at an alternative. I don't know how much of that is left, whether people really want to come into civil society or they have no option and therefore they come. I think we need to recalibrate our investments in the way we look at people in civil society. So that's the big thought which has come to me, that I need to rethink where should we be investing more. Yeah.
Thank you, Gagan. I think that's so central. If we don't reflect on what is happening at this point, then what do we really take away? And very valid. We've also seen that even in the response to the pandemic, this sort of dichotomy between those who just rush in without thinking twice and those who do have a long list of parameters of yes, no, if only, so on. I think, and I mean, if civil society spaces, if aid spaces are really for justice and change, then where do we really? I think recalibrate is very important. What you're saying. I think clearly we are in this massive churn that's going on. As of course as individuals, each of us are facing, but also as civil society, as countries. And you've both mentioned it briefly, but I think if maybe Lisa, you could specifically think and speak about what are the changes you think organizations should make at this point, and take this as that opportunity. We keep saying there's a small window of opportunity that's open. What changes can smaller organizations make in the nature of their work, in their strategies, in their leadership, and what would be the role of the larger aid sector to support that? If you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, in fact, I think one of the things that Gagan said about the people coming or how people engage with civil society, one very interesting kind of development that we've seen in Civicus is that, in fact, our membership has doubled in the last 2 years, but the members are no longer formal civil society organizations. They're individuals from across the world. And I think that's one of the biggest opportunities that both big and small organizations need to connect with. The fact that every person, no matter who they are, feels a sense of, okay, lovely to see your daughter, feels a sense of agency. And they don't need, a formal kind of mediator to actually engage with government or to engage with issues, at least on the digital space, right? So there is a sense of like activism that is much bigger than anything we've seen in a long time. I think the climate movement, for instance, is a really good example of that, but also Black Lives Matter and a lot of other issues where, one of the things we do is bring out a state of civil society report annually. And if you look at the trends across the last 10 years, the biggest shifts in terms of regime change, policy change, really public engagement with new issues like the Me Too movement as well, has been because of individuals expressing their opinion and then connecting very quickly together across the world. So I think that's a huge opportunity that organizations then need to take. Even for us, it means that we have to unlearn the way we communicate our issues and engage people, right? We can't really get all technical and, and it's not that we need to simplify our issues because our issues are complex, but we just need to make the opportunities for action a lot more accessible and then make it possible for any person anywhere who feels about, something about an issue to be able to quickly understand what they need to do or what their contribution to influencing change can be. On the flip side of that, the two civic restrictions that have really increased, especially since the pandemic, are censorship and surveillance. And that really is a reinforcement of the fact that people, when they speak out, do have the power to shake up governments. And which is why I think the clampdown on digital space and expression is so high, because there is this real fear from governments who haven't really learned how to engage with this new generation of civic or citizen participation, right? They're not able to engage with dissent. They're not able to engage with new social movements. They don't really know what to do with them. And there are very few governments, at least nationally, who've been able to kind of unlearn what it is to be an authoritarian top-down type governance structure or model. And I think we need to kind of unpack and explore a lot more maybe of the local or some of the the women leaders who've been appreciated during COVID for being much more open, much more inclusive, and much more engaging. And I think that's the kind of narrative we should also be creating, especially around elections, that people need to be voting in the right kind of leaders, because we can't really be having the strongman authoritarian kind of model as the model that people think will help the country or countries move forward, right? And I feel quite hopeful, because I think especially I mean, there may be some exceptions, but for a large part, younger people are much more comfortable with this kind of inclusive, very open leadership that's allows itself to be vulnerable and allows itself to co-create and design solutions together with others. And I think that's the kind of culture we also need to bring into our own organizations. I mean, nobody wants someone who is a know-it-all and thinks that they have exactly the answer to every single question, and need to everybody else just needs to kind of close down their minds and follow through. So I think the more we experiment, even within our own organizations, within our families, within other spaces that we personally kind of inhabit, on how we unpack power and how we deal with power and engagement differently, the more easy it is then for others to understand and reinforce that experience, right, of not seeing power in a kind of a patriarchal, authoritarian, top-down kind of way.
I think very relevant what you're saying in terms of the people-led movements, which have really been standing. And I think very interesting when you said even the membership has turned individual. I sort of have a follow-up question in terms of, because of course the pushback from the state and the powers that maybe will be much higher. Because this is dissipated, it's difficult to even engage in control. So there will be pushback, and also we do see burnout and fizzling out of some of these processes. So do you have thoughts on how do we stay engaged? How can we? You did mention co-creation and creating that sort of acceptance of vulnerability so that we can walk together. But any other thoughts in terms of keeping these alive in the long term, beyond flashes, so that we understand that this is complex, these are systemic issues, and how can we support each other along that? Just a quick follow-up, if you would.
So I think, in fact, the lockdown has been a real test of that, right? Like, how do you engage people who are working in an organization together or in a network together who haven't had an opportunity to actually see each other face to face for the last 6 months, but we're still connected and we still share a sense of what is important and what we need to do together. So at least in my own experience with Civicus, I think we've actually the lockdown has really pushed us to prioritize what we can actually achieve impact on better, and kind of let go of a lot of things that are nice to have but aren't really the most important things to do right now. And I think that's going to be a very strong trend in the next few years, because all of us are going to face some level of funding or resourcing restrictions or kind of scaling back. And it's going to push us, one, to prioritize the things that are most important to our constituencies and to the purpose of the organization. But overall, also, I think, be much more focused on how we share resources and expertise across organizations. So I think that kind of inherent, kind of flaw in the way civil society organizations are resourced, which force them almost to compete with each other, has to completely go away now. I think we need to have a cap on growth. I mean, big organizations should actually let go of resources they don't need and share them with smaller organizations. And we actually need to come together, and we have been quite strongly to also challenge donors on these practices. I mean, we no longer can afford a sector where we are working in silos and competing with each other's outcomes. We need a sector which is much more coherent and convergent, and that's absolutely like stepping forward and bending backwards to support and sustain local efforts. I think that has to be like the one shared purpose that all of us have, no matter where we are. I think you're still on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was on mute. Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I think we'll pick that up again, I think, in the next round. But just turning to Gagan, you've been working a lot with so many organizations over the last several decades and also the last 6 months, especially, and also young people. What do you think are the opportunities for change for the way young people are approaching this sector, and what are their expectations, and what can organizations, both at the grassroots and at the larger sectoral level, really offer spaces for people who want to make a difference, but perhaps are still, figuring out how, which, where, maybe they're a little cynical about the way organizations work. What do you think? In this moment of churn, do we have any opportunities that we should seize?
I really liked what Lisa said, and I think she's hit the nail on the head. So from a civil society perspective, we have to deformalize. I think we have just become too formal in our systems and structures and practices, and we have to sort of redo all that. And in all that, I think we have to start now investing in individuals, walking with them and just seeing whether their creative ideas to protest, to look at new alternatives, can be supported. And then, really, I think the opposing frame, which Lisa said and I engage, I mean, you look at India, it's like one man knows it all. Now, how will you break that by saying we don't want civil society where one person knows it all? And therefore, how do you build collectives, community-based leadership? Because in the pandemic, they are the ones who came out. The rest of them were on computers. So I think giving that power and creating that enabling environment and deconstruct our huge corporate framed and corporate learned behavior NGOs that we had made ourselves, largely donor driven first, but then becomes a kind of very paternalistic and masculine way of running organizations. I think we've lost the feminine in the civil society. And how do we give space to the feminine to come out? And automatically, I think we will get a lot of that love, empathy, compassion back, and not the results chain framework, which is killing and creating a lot of, a sense of dissatisfaction among young people. That is why they're leaving organizations. And they want to go on. They're interested in the issue, they're interested in the thematics, but they just can't operate in that very masculine system. So I think feminizing our civil society would be where we would have the investment. But I just want to bring one thing. Violence has increased, and visible violence has increased. There was always an invisible violence going on, but now there's physical violence going on the streets, whether it is with Muslims, whether it is with Dalits, whether it's with women. And we haven't really thought of ways to deal with this very brazen violence. Look at what's happening in Uttar Pradesh. Even Gujarat has been happening since 2002. And how are we preparing ourselves to deal with this? Therefore, again, investing in art, culture, would that be the way to bring out the conscience of a nation? I think this is the kind of churning that has to go through at this stage. And I think a lot of young people are very excited and are finding very creative spaces to dissent, to protest, and to find actually on the ground alternatives.
Oh, yes, and I know you know many of them. So that is my follow-up question to you. Can you give us some examples of where you've seen this happen, and what, if we want to, I mean, emulate is not the best word, but things that we can learn from, where young people, organizations have been able to, really feminize themselves, look at social change and justice as a process which all of us are together. It's not a one-way street, and sort of sustain, not in terms of the usual sustainability language that the development sector uses, but really sustain that spirit, sustain that process of change, sustain that narrative. It would be great to hear of some examples that you see amongst all the lots of work that you do.
But what has always struck me is what Martin does at Dalit Shakti Kendra, and how he's basically saying, don't train yourself to be in jobs. If you want to be an activist, first be able to actually be able to do your own business, to be able to do your own thing, and then participate in civic processes. And there one has found a lot of young Dalit women, tribal women, who then may be doing some small things in their village, but are able to actually protest very, very strongly. It's amazing. I talk of Martin and he starts calling me. That is the kind of... So I think, and the kind of nuanced ways they start protesting, of girls going to the panchayat and saying, the wife who's the sarpanch will sit in the chair and not the husband, fighting it just because, and say, who are you? I'm from Dalit Shakti Kendra, I know the law. These are the kind of breaking the patriarchy barriers at the ground, and having the courage then to stand up to the consequences. I think there's a lot of that happening on the ground, and I see it more with young girls, a lot of young girls. So I wish we had, Lisa, thousands of fellowships to give to these young girls.
Very important things you're saying in terms of those who are most discriminated against, standing up with that courage, but also doing that very locally. And it's resonating with, we're not talking about massive national level, international level. I think that's all a build up. It's really start shifting those, recalibrate that at the local. And I think that's really what then sort of will find its way, work its way upwards. But that's very nice. I think that's great. Lisa, I will ask you too, for if you have, examples where organizations or, campaigns have really been able to embrace this courage at the local level and sustain beyond the initial, interest, and move beyond that cynicism. If you know of any examples, it would be great to hear of them.
I think almost everything we've seen that's been a fundamental social shift in the last few years is representative of that, right? So even if you're looking at, the regime change in Sudan, for instance, where it's a lot of people from diverse walks of life coming together and asking for more democratic forms of government, or in Hong Kong, where you're seeing people across ages, across backgrounds coming together and challenging one of the most feared or the strongest kind of state that we have in the world right now in terms of really clamping down on civic freedom. So I think, in fact, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have. So if you don't have a very large population of local activists who, in their right as individuals or in their identity as individuals, can take on and challenge issues, you're really not going to see, a lot of the other changes is going to be incremental and quite safe in terms of what, people are being resourced to do. So I think the shift that we really need is in the definition of success, and this is a little bit kind of building on what Gagan said, what is the definition of success for in both individuals and organizations in civil society? So for individuals, really being able to connect and really experience their own ability or their own agency for change, right? Irrespective of which organization or role or job or whatever you have. And that requires, I think, organizations to also recognize and appreciate people, the skills and the interests and the capacities that people bring across the board, and then have structures that are able to facilitate the kind of change that people can drive through the organizational the channels, but without tying them down to a lot of structures and procedures. And I mean, I've worked in organizations where the future of the organization is almost more important than the issue or the cause that that organization was kind of designed to serve. And therefore, I think, again, for leadership of organizations and the boards of organizations to continuously reinforce that it is not the level of income that you bring to the organization, it's not the size of the organization. Let's not use the same kind of private sector benchmarks to define success in civil society. I mean, it really has to be purpose, learning, and impact. And that, no matter how small the organization is, or whether or not you choose to, what your resourcing strategy is, if you just choose to operate informally, or you're just an, informal network of volunteers. But I think it's really important also for the governance of organizations to keep, reinforcing that message with the staff and leaders of organizations, that we are not here to see your balance sheet and your income statement and how much money you're raising from where and how you're competing with others. We're here to see what is the change you're actually, kind of delivering in relation to the reason that you exist in the first place. And I think there are several people, who've written about this. Gagan himself is an expert on the governance of civil society organizations. But I think that's where, for me, in terms of organizations, where the mess starts to happen, because the internal language of the organization becomes so much about the success of the organization itself. The constituency outside and the cause is completely abandoned. And I see this a lot in the international development sector. And I think, if you're getting into a role where 80% of your time is to serve the internal process of the organization, you're in the wrong job. Like, you just need to leave that organization as quickly as you can. So I think we really need to challenge ourselves, to really create organizations that are designed for change. In fact, there's a study that somebody shared recently and said that in any country, like a study of around 100 protest movements that have taken place in the last few years have shown that in any country, if as little as 3.5% of the population gets together and demands change, it will result in the government either being toppled, or some kind of massive political shift that needs to happen. So there isn't really, you don't really have to get 50% of your national population or local population together to really be heard and to make an impact, right? But you do need a very committed, very dedicated, very innovative set of people who are that small kind of catalytic group to drive that change. And I think that's the kind of long-term thinking that, that whole identification, or seeing yourself as an activist first and somebody who serves an organization later, that really should define how we bring and sustain people in civil society.
If I could just come in here, Roshni, what Lisa tells me, I used to use this metaphor, which I borrowed from a book from Gareth Morgan, is the metaphor of a white ant colony. And white ants, actually what they eat, the colony is built out of what they excrete after what they eat. And if you see, they build at least 1,000 or more times, or 2,000 times their size, which is much bigger than what a human being builds. And if you look very closely, it seems chaotic. But when you look at a white ant colony from far, it's very grand. And that to me is the metaphor of reimagining the way civil society has to be organized. Each white ant is contributing to the change process. and it's not organized. It's very how it just happens, and the design is then seen from far. So it's a very powerful metaphor which I use a lot. And Lisa, when you were talking, that's what was hitting me. That's what civil society has to be: a huge white ant colonies across the world.
I think that's just very beautiful. I think it really does capture the sort of conversations we've been having. I mean, I think definitely what we are also hearing taking away is local, and we have this saying in Hindi, "Jinka sawal unka netritva." Really looking at the people whose issue it is are the people who are leading the struggle, and I think somewhere in this, effort to professionalize and corporatize, we've forgotten that ultimately people whose issues it is are the ones who take the leadership. So I think that's really emerged, and that will happen only local, because that's where the real politics and the power struggles happen. I think also we've heard a lot in terms of the culture of organizations, really reimagining that, and not looking at formal places where I just fit in for some time and then leave, but actually coming into that space and recreating it and making something new out of it, which wasn't imagined, or in a sort of a non-linear way. And I think also this the whole point that you both raised in terms of shifting the definitions and that recalibrating what are those parameters of organizations. Is it a growth mindedness, or is it really looking at change? If we're really change focused, then we will have to relook at the way the governing boards are organized, the hierarchies are organized, and really I would say basically look at organizations as spaces for convening where change can then happen, as opposed to just having a very pre-planned agenda, and if this doesn't happen, then these are the these are the implications of that. So that's what we are hearing. Just to wrap up, I think, and I think you've both already spoken about this, but if you had any final thoughts on the role all of us can play, because the people who are listening are also coming at it from different orientations, different lenses, different life experiences. What role do you think everyone can play in this process of reimagining both the way change happens and the way organizations can support this change process? So if that could be your closing thoughts. Lisa, or Gagan, you want to go first? Go ahead.
Yeah, just so much you mentioned boards, and I sit on 22 boards in Indian and South Asian civil society, and I go with the simple tenet where I try to ask the intelligent questions, which is not, but I think the core value which I have to bring in, I keep reminding when I get into a board is, can I listen? Can I love? Can I respect what's going on there? And then can I expect honesty in return? I think that's the only value I can add when I am 65 and sit on all these spaces. So for me, it's not the corporate board that I have to reconstruct in civil society. Yeah, but Lisa, you should have the last.
Thank you, Gagan. Yeah, Lisa.
No, so I think for me, the parting word is something I learned actually very strongly from the Yuva community, of which all of us are a part. And that's about solidarity. And I think every organization, one of the definition or the criteria for impact should be what is the level of solidarity you're providing to other organizations who don't have the kind of resources and capacities that you have. And that should be non-negotiable, I think, especially in this kind of pandemic and post-pandemic period. So every organization, because you're lucky enough to have a structure, you're lucky enough to have some level of resources and capacities on board, you need to be thinking of how you support at least 10 other organizations, if not 100, who don't have that structure and who maybe don't need that structure, but they have a purpose to achieve, and could be supported with the kind of capacities or formal organization of resources that you have. And I think we did that really well in Yuva. I mean, everything we did was linked to how we were either kind of amplifying or supporting or working along with other local organizations or social movements. And I think we've lost that focus, especially in international development organizations. I mean, organizations should be, even in their annual reports, be reporting on how they're better supporting broader civil society. And I think creating new mechanisms, whether it's solidarity funding or, the legal kind of support. I know Gagan is very involved with that. Most people who are speaking out now are being arrested or punished or penalized in some way. They don't have any support in terms of who's going to bail them out when they get arrested. And I think we just need to find better and new ways to be able to combine our resources and provide the support that a person needs the minute that they are kind of up against the law and kind of being harassed or intimidated by the state for just speaking out and asking the questions that they have a right to ask. And I think figuring out how that we need to do that better. And in fact, the conversation is called Healing Solidarity, right? So I think that should really be one of the things we put a lot of our minds and our hearts to in the coming months, because we're going to need a lot of that as the fight gets tougher, but hopefully will also end in the kind of changes we want to see.
That's just great. I think you've really looked at both from the individual to the organization. I think really covered it. So beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much both for your time. I think in a very short 40 minutes, we've really gone very deep. And I think so many important things for us to think. I've learned a lot. I hope it was nice for you to meet each other and interact with each other as well.